Okay, thank you. Uh, Chaitanya, it's over to you. Yeah, please start the proceedings.
Good evening to everyone. My name is M. Sri Sai Chaitanya, pursuing my MTech in Computer Structural Engineering at IIT Hyderabad. I feel honored to extend my warm greetings to all present here. On behalf of the IIT Hyderabad student chapter, I want to take this opportunity to welcome our guest speaker, faculty, scholars, the research fraternity, industrial professionals, and all the students to join the online session on the topic uncertainty quantification of dynamical systems. It is my privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Biswarup Bhattacharyya. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Hyderabad, and the team leader of Stochastic Computational Modeling. His research primarily focuses on uncertainty quantification, digital twin, physics-informed machine learning for computational mechanics and dynamics, reliability analysis, structural health monitoring, and data-driven metamaterial design. He has published several papers in reputed journals and has participated in several conferences as a keynote speaker. He is also acting as the organizing secretary of the upcoming 15th Structural Engineering Convention to be held in IIT Hyderabad during December 2026. We are truly privileged to have him with us today. Before we start, a small announcement for all participants. If you have any questions or queries during the session, please type them in the chat box. We will address them in the question and answer session at the end, moderated by Dr. P. Praveen Kumar Venkatrao, Faculty Advisor of the Student Chapter. Now, without any delay, we will turn the time over to our speaker. Sir, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chaitanya, for introducing me, and thank you, Dr. Praveen, also to for inviting me for this presentation, for this invited talk, and I also thank you to all the IIT student chapter at IIT Hyderabad who are organizing this event periodically over the period of time. So, my today's talk is about the topic which I have written here, uncertainty quantification of dynamical systems. And I'm presently, as already introduced by Chaitanya, that I'm presently acting as assistant professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Hyderabad. And I am leading the stochastic compression modeling lab here, basically. And this is my website. If you want to check anything, you can check through the website. I just put the pointer. I don't know, where is it? Yeah. Okay. So this is the content of today's presentation. So I will start with the introduction to uncertainty quantification for generic problems, and then I will introduce the time-independent surrogate models for uncertainty quantification, and then I will focus on mostly reduced order surrogate models. So mostly my talk is oriented on the reduced order surrogate model for uncertainty quantification of dynamical systems, and then I will show the applications of reduced order surrogate model, and then I will show some of our recent advances on reduced order surrogate model, where we have developed some online approaches for uncertainty quantification of dynamical systems using the reduced order surrogate models, and then I will conclude the talk with some output which I got from the researches. So let's start with any generic problem. So for example, if we have some engineering dynamical systems, so how basically it behaves, that is very important to us. For example, if we have a bridge, whether it is a train bridge or road bridges or only the pedestrian bridges, doesn't matter, but always it will have some sort of dynamic behavior, and it will be because of maybe ambient vibration, maybe because of external loadings, or maybe because of wind load, or earthquake is obvious one of the reasons that it comes when it is an external, it is an extreme event. One second. So it's always crucial to understand what kind of response it shows when there are some extreme events or there are some inherent uncertainty present in the system, how it will behave. Second thing, I just want to show that wind turbines. So we know that wind turbines are very much, it behaves mostly dynamically. All the parts of the wind turbine, if we just talk about the vertical component, that is the vertical column component, and it behaves like a dynamic system. And then if I talk about the rotor and the blades also, so they also act as the dynamic system component. So we can have different kind of responses for different kind of structures. This is one of the situation where we can get different type of situation, and we can get different type of responses if we have some sort of uncertainty present in the system, or that may come from the external loading. Here external loading mainly comes due to wind or ambient vibrations, or from earthquake. And third category is obvious. It is like tall buildings. So tall buildings obviously always susceptible to the vibrations, and it is always behave dynamically, whether it is ambient vibrations or it is always like under huge wind load. If we just go up, it will always give us some of the horizontal load acts very dynamically, the wind load, and it will give us some vibrations, and we want to know what kind of responses we get if we have some uncertainty involved in the system. And another thing is that if we have some machines, for example, if we install some machines which are vibrating machines, and then what kind of responses we get from the structure, or to the platform, or from the structure that where we are installing the machines. So those structure need to be analyzed based on what kind of vibrations we are getting from those structures. So those things are main things we just encounter in dynamical systems, but these are not limited to these structures. There are many more structures which are susceptible to dynamic loads. Now, all these structures, when we talk about all these structures, we can analyze these structures through experimental study. For example, we put some sensors and then we get some data, and we can assume that, okay, those data are true to some extent, and then we can analyze that based on the data collected and whatever uncertainty involved in the system. Another way, what we call is the computational models. So we can make the computational model of the system, and then we can analyze the system. So in most of the cases for uncertainty quantification domain, this is the format we follow. So we usually use the computational models. So how the flow map of a computational model look like? So in computational models, we assume that the computational models as black box model, and then we want to compute the quantity of interest as a function of the input parameter. So if I just look through the flow map, for example, so for input parameters for any generic problems, if we take any generic problems, whether it is bridges, buildings, or anything, any dynamic problem or any static problem also. So we can have this kind of input parameter, for example, geometry, material property, we can have loading, we can have some initial or boundary conditions. And then we can put that into some of the computation model, and where we analyze the system, and we can analyze using analytical equations. For example, if we have some analytical equations available, for example, if we want to analyze one beam, for example, under UDL or under rolling loads, so we can analyze it using the analytical equations. Those equations are available to us, we can analyze it easily. Then we can use the finite difference models, finite element models, or other computation models, advanced computation models, for example, XFEM or finite volume models. So whatever models we have, so we can use all the models depending on the system, depending on the situation. We can use the models to analyze the system, and then what is our interest is to get the quantity of interest, which is our output. And output may be deformation, stress, strains, or for example, for dynamic problem, maybe frequency, mode shapes, or maybe for a fracture problem, maybe damage, where the damage, how it is going to propagate. All these parameters we want to understand from the output point of view. Now, before I dive into the uncertainty quantification, we must need that from where those uncertainties are coming, basically. So broadly, these uncertainties categorized into two categories. One is aleatory uncertainty, another is epistemic uncertainty. I will come to the epistemic uncertainty once I finish the aleatory one. So this aleatory uncertainties basically are inherent uncertainty for any structure or any system. Okay, so basically these uncertainties we cannot mitigate through any approach. Whatever approach we take, whatever we take into account during the calculation, during the design, these uncertainties are there always. So basically it can come from the material properties, geometrical properties, external loading, noise, and imperfections. So these are always there basically. And second type of uncertainty, as I told you, that it is epistemic uncertainty. So epistemic uncertainty we can mitigate to some extent, but not fully, but to some extent by having a better assumptions, for example. So it can come from modeling error or error in the experiment or lack of knowledge or maybe assumptions in the modeling, because we assume sometimes, for example, when we design a beam or analyze a beam, for example, so we assume that the beam is under a small deformation, and we sometimes follow that simple bending theory or Euler-Bernoulli beam theory, but it may not be true always. Okay, there may be some nonlinearity present in the system and we may not be accounting that. So those things are the modeling uncertainty, and we can mitigate to some extent this modeling uncertainty while analyzing the structure. So our approach when we are considering this uncertainty quantification, mostly we use this part, that is aleatory uncertainty. We sometimes use epistemic uncertainty, sometimes we do not. Okay, but mostly we use the aleatory uncertainty, and most of my talk in this presentation are based on aleatory uncertainty only. Now, next is how, once we have this input uncertain parameter, how to propagate the uncertainty through some system, through some dynamic problem. That is another thing we should understand. Okay. So first thing is that we have the input uncertain parameters, which can be aleatory or epistemic, as I already mentioned in the previous slide. And then what we can do is we can do the experiment, or through some computational model we propagate the uncertainty, and those uncertainties are there. As I told you, those uncertainties are there already in the system, so we cannot have a system without any uncertainty. So we can analyze the structure by doing the experiment. I will come to the point that how can we do experiment even with the uncertainty, and we can have some analytical form of the system, or the quantity of interest, and then you can get the quantity of interest from directly from the analytical form or closed form solutions. And also we can do some numerical or computational models. So mostly we follow this one or the closed form solutions when we want to get the quantity of interest. So then our objective is to get the uncertain model response or quantity of interest, which can be again the deformation stress strain or FRF, for example. So these are the thing. Now, in much broader spectrum, how to do uncertainty quantification. So in much broader spectrum, when we have real world problems, so these real world problems can be formulated in different way. For example, we can do physical experiment for a real world problem, it's obvious. And also we can model the real world problem with some mathematics into it, and then we feed the mathematics into the computational model to get the response in a computational way. Okay, and then what we try to match is basically we want to try to match that whether my experimental observation is correctly matching the computational observation. Then we satisfy, okay, that our computational model is fine to work in the way that experiment is been designed, and now I am happy to use my computational model for the particular structure. So this is one of the way we do for validation. Now, Obviously, these input uncertain parameters are there inside the physical experiment or mathematical model or compression model. Okay. And then what we have, all these physical input uncertain parameters are there, and we want to propagate through the computational model. Again, this computational model is coming to the picture, and we want to predict the response, or I would say response, uncertain behavior of the response. And we want to quantify the uncertainty using different statistics that maybe, I mean, I'm showing two of those, but I'm not showing many. But these are the two of those statistics which are being used mostly. One is probability density function, another is statistical moments. Okay. And this is what we are interested in, the output quantity for the uncertain parameter, uncertain systems. And from these statistical moments and PDF, we want to also sometimes predict the sensitivity of the input parameters under the uncertain condition. And that is also possible if we want to go back and check what is the sensitivity of the input parameter to the response quantity, to the particular response quantity. Okay. So this is how the flow map look like when we try to perform the uncertainty quantification of a problem. Now here there are many things. I mean, many of you may not be aware or may be aware of these things, but these things need to be checked with proper guidance on how to calculate PDA for statistical moments for a particular system. Now, I'm going to give you an outline of available approaches for uncertainty quantification in general, very much in general. So the first part is like this is very basic approach, or very I would say standard approach to follow for any uncertainty quantification problem, which is called Monte Carlo simulations, and it is also frequentist approach. So here we perform the uncertainty quantification based on random sampling, and it provides a very accurate result, but it requires a lot of samples, large number of model evolutions. We talk about this. We will talk about this in next one or two slides. So this is basically computationally expensive approach. So if we want to use MCS, we can use it, but it is computationally expensive. So we want to avoid the approach basically mostly. And there are other sampling based approaches which are also frequentist approaches, and here also the main motive is to reduce the number of sampling for a particular problem. But again, we are following the same loop of the MCS, but we are trying to reduce the number of samples, and we are trying to increase the accuracy in some way, so that we don't need to use that many samples, or that high number of samples that MCS usually use. That is, for example, LHS whole sequence, or there are similar other approaches. And the third one, what we want to focus on these topics really, so that is called surrogate modeling approaches. So in surrogate modeling approaches, what it does is basically we substitute the physical system with some mathematical functions, and then we can use the mathematical function at any point of time to get the uncertainty quantification of a particular response, because we have fitted the mathematical function using some data or something like that, and then we have substituted the physical system. Now no longer we don't need the physical system, we can use the mathematical function without using the physical system. Physical system means we don't need to do experiment anymore, we don't need to do a computational model evolution anymore, but we can use the mathematical function itself without using any computation or experiment or model. And that's why it maintains a trade-off between accuracy and efficiency, because there is a part that we want to make it accurate, but as well as we want to make it efficient. Now, as I was telling you that I will briefly go through Monte Carlo simulation, what is the flow map. So what we do is basically we define first the random variables and corresponding distributions. Here distribution means the law of the random variable that is being followed by the random variable. Okay. So what law of distributions it is being followed. And based on the laws of distribution, we generate the set of samples for the input parameters. And maybe let's assume that x is the input parameter, and we have the joint PDF, joint probability density function f of suffix x, and we draw the samples, basically a number of samples for all the parameters we have, input parameters. And what we do, we evaluate the quantity of interest for each sample separately. So we run the problem for n times if we have n number of samples, and that we can do by experiment or computation. But let's assume that we want to do 10,000 experiment. It is not feasible. It is not feasible at all to do 10,000 experiment even on a simple problem also. Even if you think of a cube also, I mean concrete cube, I mean it's not possible to do compressive test on a concrete cube for 1,000 times. So it is very much infeasible. So that's why we emphasize mostly on comparison models. So we try to use the comparison models to get the same results as the experiment for all this number of samples, all this number of trials. And what we do from the all the responses, now we get all the responses for n times, and then from all these responses we try to predict the statistical characteristics of the quantity of interest, because that is what we want to know, what is the statistical characteristic. And that we can do by using by predicting the PDA, by predicting the statistical moments and all these things. And how to do, I will show you. Now, as I told you, there are advantages of MCS approach, that it is robust, very much robust, because it depends only on the random sampling, and it is just depending on the repeated simulations of the comparison model. And it is also suitable for high-dimensional problem, but it requires high-performance computing system. Okay, but as I told you, that it converges very well when n is the number of sample goes to infinite. Okay, and I mean it is not very much infinite, but it is very high. Okay, and the disadvantage is here that because we cannot use that many samples, like n to the power n tends to infinite, we cannot use in general. So it can sometimes give you high statistical uncertainty depending on number of samples. Okay, because for example, if you can spend only 1,000 samples, then you can have some uncertainty in the prediction. And also, as I told you, it has very slow convergence rate, which is approximately directly proportional to the n to the power minus of half. So now I am coming to the surrogate modeling part, that why we need it and how to do surrogate modeling basically. And if I just recap again, what is surrogate modeling? So we approximate a physical system with a mathematical function here, and the mathematical function can have specific form depending on different surrogate model. Okay, so we can have different surrogate model, and it can be different form of surrogate model, and it depends very much on what problem we want to solve. Okay, for example, for static problem it can be different, and for dynamic problem it can be different. And then what it does, basically it has several parameters. The surrogate model has several parameters, and it learns the parameters based on available data. And here we try to use limited data, because we know that doing experiment on large set of data is not feasible for any engineering systems. Okay, so that's what the main challenge is, that how to get very accurate result using very limited set of data. And this set of limited data we call as experimental design points. And that's why it maintains a trade-off between accuracy and efficiency, because we want to use less data and higher accuracy. So these are some of the advantages, that when we have some actual quantity of interest y of x, and this is the actual model, computational model, basically m of x, and this is obviously a function of x is the input parameter. And basically what we are doing, we are trying to approximate m of x with m hat of x, and this is one approximate model, and this is computational model, and this can take hours. For example, FEM, you can imagine that FEM you can take hours to solve one simulation. But here, if it is a mathematical function, you can literally solve anything in few seconds. Okay, So that's why it is written that it can take greater than hours per simulation. But in surrogate model, in few seconds, you can evaluate even 10 to the power 5 samples, which is 1 lakh samples. You can evaluate because it is a mathematical model. Now, here very much important to note is that all the surrogate model, whatever we develop, it requires extensive validation for accuracy, because nevertheless it is important to note that accuracy is very much important for any system. Okay, we cannot compromise with accuracy at any point of time. And for different surrogate model, different number of parameters we need to estimate, and we can have several number of parameter. We can have thousands of parameter. We can have millions of parameters also, and it involves the advanced mathematics. And these are the few surrogate model approaches that are available in the literature for uncertainty quantification. There are many, but these are I have written some of those. So I will now focus on one surrogate model that I have been using since last few years, which is called polynomial Gauss expansion. And now I'm directly starting with the uncertain or stochastic response quantity, because that is my main interest here, to predict the uncertainty in the response quantity. So why is the response quantity? Here zeta is the input uncertain parameters or random variables, I would say, and t is basically time, because it depends on input uncertain parameter and also time. And this is the specific form of PC. So it has infinite number of summed over infinite number of terms with some coefficients which is called AI, and some of the basis function. And this basis function is basically called multivariate polynomial basis function. And this is coefficient. So this one depends on particular type of random variable. So for different random variable, we need to use different basis function. And this one we need to calculate. So this is one of the parameter basically. So this is parameter of this PC model. So this is what we need to estimate to fit the PC model. Now obviously we cannot use in general this infinite number of terms in for any problem, okay, in general. So we need to truncate the PC model. So we truncate the PC model using n terms. So how we truncate it? So we truncate using some specific polynomial degree. So p is the polynomial degree, maximum degree that we choose, and d is the number of dimension for the input random variables. So it can be 2, 3, 4, or 100, or even 1000. So depending on that, this n can be calculated using this expression. And now how we calculate this phi? This phi we can calculate the inner product between the univariate polynomial basis functions. So these univariate polynomial basis functions are orthogonal, and these have specific form, as I told you. So this multivariate polynomial basis function is basically calculated directly from the univariate polynomial basis functions, and these univariate polynomial basis functions follow some specific form depending on what type of law the random variables are following. So for example, if the random variable follow a uniform distribution, then this basis function will follow the Legendre polynomial. And if this basis function is following Gaussian distribution, then this univariate polynomial will follow Hermite distribution, Hermite polynomial. So this is how basically it looked like. Now the only thing that we want to estimate here is this coefficient, and how we can estimate this coefficient. That is another thing. Now there are two broad approaches. I mean, two broad approaches means these are the two broad approaches. One is intrusive approach, and is non-intrusive approach. Okay, and this is one of the intrusive approaches, and this is one of the non-intrusive approaches. There are many more. Okay, but these two are very basic things, so I just want to introduce. Now, in intrusive approach, this Clalerkin projection is one of the basic or standard approach to calculate the PC coefficients. Now, if this is the governing differential equation of the system, whether it is dynamic or static or whatever, if it is dynamic, we can add one t here basically. So I have not added it. I just make it general. So this is the governing differential equation, and maybe this L we can assume is a differential operator, for example. So what we do here, you can see that response quantity y is there inside the differential equation. So what we do, instead of y, we substitute this y using this expression of PC model, and then my full differential equations or governing differential equation will be expressed in terms of this PC model instead of y. Okay. Now, as from the property of the multivariate polynomial basis function, so these are basically orthogonal. So what we do here basically, so we project this on each of the basis functions, which where this I is not equal to j or I can be equal to j. And by doing this, what we will get is basically we get the equations, which is n number of equations, because in this expansion we have n number of a parameter present, and we want to calculate all this n number of a parameter. And if we project that on this basis function, we will get the parameter, we will get the equations, number of equations, which is n equations, and we will have n unknowns. So we solve this system of linear equations to get the n unknowns. So this is how we solve, and we get ai for n times. And so basically it requires the governing differential equations, and very difficult for nonlinear problems because it requires solving the differential equations for all the linear or nonlinear system of equations. So it is very difficult for any problem, any complex problem. Now on the other hand, we have non-intrusive approach, which is general, but ordinary least square is one of the non-intrusive approaches. So again, here also we just approximate this y using this expression. Here I have just not included t, just for the generic purpose. And here, what we are doing is basically from this zeta, we are drawing samples, n samples, and basically if we draw n samples, we will have a matrix which is the shape of n cross d, and this we will call it random variable matrix. And then from this zeta, if we have this matrix, then we calculate the phi for all the elements in this zeta, capital Zeta, capital J, and then we calculate this phi matrix, and this phi matrix, which is the shape of n cross n. And if it is dynamic problem, then we will calculate the quantity of interest, and this quantity of interest will have a shape of n cross nt. Nt is the number of time step here. And then what we do, we calculate at each time step, we calculate the parameters, all the parameters at each time step using the ordinary least square. This one is the standard equation. You can follow the standard equation to get the unknown parameter vector. This a is a vector here, so this vector we can get. So here the main challenge is that we still need at least n number of, at least small n number of points, data points, to compute the PC coefficient properly, because otherwise it will be like underdetermined system. And another issue with these two approaches, whatever approaches, is that we have to project this on the, we have to use this PC model for each time step, and that is one of the main challenges, because for example, here we have to do time integration, and here we don't have to do time integration, but before that we have to do time integration, and then we can use the data, and but in data also we have to use it for each time step. So to mitigate all these issues, we have developed some reduced order surrogate model. So in reduced order surrogate model, there are many approaches which are reduced order models, but here I am explaining one of those which we have used. That is called proper orthogonal decomposition, and this is one of the called snapshot version of proper orthogonal decomposition. So for example, if we have a matrix, because when we calculate the response for a dynamic system, so it is obviously a matrix. It has some rows. Rows corresponds to the number of samples. Here I have written that rows correspond to the number of samples, and columns correspond to the number of time steps. Okay. And then what we have, we decompose into three different matrices. So first is the left singular matrix, which is called U, and then we have singular value matrix, and then we have right singular matrix. So all these things we get by decomposing this using POD. Now this left singular matrix and right singular matrix, this is usually transpose actually, W transpose. But if we get these columns of this matrix and columns of this right singular matrix are basically orthogonal. Okay, so this is coming directly by calculating the eigenvalues of these singular values. Okay. So usually we have a very large data set, and then we have very large number of values, and that we don't want to use. So basically we don't want to use all the values because here in singular vectors, I mean singular value matrix, what we will see, some of the values up to 0 will be there. After that, no zeros will be there. So I mean after that there will be no real values, so there will be 0 basically. So those singular values will not contribute to the system dynamics. Okay, so according to the singular values we try to capture the system dynamics, or we want to represent the system dynamics. So for that, what we do, we use less number of POD modes than whatever we have calculated. We use NB number of POD modes instead of all the POD modes that we have calculated. And then accordingly, we use the smaller size vector or smaller size matrix for left singular and right singular, and also for the singular values. So that depends on how how many singular values are required to represent this matrix, this Y matrix, response matrix. So how to calculate that, how many singular values are required? So here you can see this is dark green, and then it is going to be a fade a little bit afterwards. So basically dark green means it has higher magnitude, then it has lower magnitude, then it is lower magnitude. It is like that. So it is basically represented using higher to lower order. Okay. So using this expression, basically, we can calculate what should be the number of modes we should use. So here number of modes is NB. So that is number of modes we are using here. And here is the total number of modes which I got from the singular values. So these values are directly coming from the singular value matrix, all these cells, that green cells. And then if we do that, if we recover a specified threshold value, this may be as per your requirement. For example, if you set it to 99%, that means if you recover the 99% of your data values, then you are okay to go with the model. Then you can set this 0.99, for example. And if this ratio is 0.99 with how many number of modes, those are the number of modes you will consider. Others you will just discard. Okay. So I'm just showing here the same thing in mathematical form, how to do it mathematically. So here we can use the correlation matrix, for example, of the data matrix. So if we have this data matrix Y, and we can use the correlation matrix and do the eigenvalue decomposition of the correlation matrix to get these POD modes. And this lambda is basically coming from the eigenvalue decomposition. I mean the eigenvalues of the eigenvalue decomposition of the correlation matrix, and this basically provides how much energy we need to calculate or we need to use to represent the same system. The same thing we can do using the singular value decomposition, and there we have this matrix, left singular matrix and right singular matrix, and we have this singular value matrix, and where we have the cells where we have included the singular values. Now we can use the normalizing procedure that to normalize the singular values, because these are orthogonal but not orthonormal. But if we want to use orthonormal modes, we can use the normalizations. And in practice, as I told you, that we have to use less number of POD modes than whatever number of samples are available even. So in general, we have seen that we need less number of POD modes than number of samples to recover energy level of 99.99%. Again, this is very problem specific, but it may not be true for all the problems. So if we have it, the POD modes, what we do, we represent this stochastic response Y using this expression where this V is basically time dependent modes and this B is basically the coefficients of coming from the POD. And these modes we have directly calculated from the singular value decomposition, but we need to calculate this one. So how to calculate this B? So we can calculate this B using the projection of the response to the V basically, because this is orthogonal. So we can project it on this response quantity to get all the NB number of POD coefficients. Now you can see that this POD coefficients are dependent only on the random variable, not on time. So what we can do, we can represent this B using this PC model, only PC model. So basically, if we club this up with everything, so we need to calculate only the PC coefficients. That is the only thing we need to calculate from this model. So that we can calculate using the ordinary least square, which I have already mentioned as the non-intrusive approach for all the NB number of POD modes. So if I just combine everything, this POD PC model will look like this. And here the only unknown we need to find out is this POD coefficients for NB number of modes. And obviously it is need to be remembered that this NB number of modes are less than the number of samples. And as I was telling that we need to find out the statistical moments, okay, for representing what kind of system it is and for representing what kind of response it is and how to quantify the uncertainty in the response quantity. So we can calculate time dependent mean and standard deviation for the dynamic problem using the expressions actually. So this is the predicted mean of the response quantity and this is predicted standard deviation for the response quantity, and this expression is directly developed using the expression directly from the PODPC model. You can see this is the PODPC model and we are representing this again here, and because of orthogonal property we can represent this mean using only the POD modes and PC coefficients. Similar to this here also, using the PC coefficients and POD modes, we can calculate the time dependent standard deviation. So no longer we need anything about the fitted model even. Okay, we no longer using the fully fitted model to calculate the predicted mean standard deviation. That is one of the uniqueness of this model, basically this PODPC model. Now I'm trying to give you an outlook how to apply this and what we are getting from this model. So this is one of the problems actually I've solved, and this is a nonlinear and non-smooth dynamic system. So here you can see that this is a 2 degree of freedom system, and here we have we call this as a structural mass, and this is a projectile mass, for example, and these two are not attached to each other. There is a nonlinear spring attached here, and this is a linear spring here. So this is the equation, I mean governing differential equation of this system. And this contact between this structure and projectile was modeled using some law called Hart's law, and it is a nonlinear. So nonlinear contact force is modeled here. And for this problem, we need to give some initial condition of initial velocity, for example. So we have given some initial velocity to initiate the vibration between these two degrees of freedom. And we have two impact conditions. So one is single impact. So if we just change it, say we can tune this basically structural stiffness to make it single impact or multiple impacts, even more than multiple impacts also. So we increase the stiffness to make it single impact, and we decrease the stiffness to make it multiple impacts. So for this problem, these are the uncertain parameters. I mean, these are the input uncertain parameters we have used So the projectile mass, the stiffness, the nonlinear stiffness, and the initial velocity. And these are the lower bound and upper bound we have specified. And all these parameters are basically following on uniform distributions between this lower bound and upper bound. Okay, and other parameters, for example, structural mass and damping, were kept constant for this problem. Now, here we have performed the uncertainty quantification for three response quantity. One is the contact force, another is projectile displacement and projectile velocity. And for the reference solution, because we don't know whether our surrogate model is correct or not, so to compare the results, we perform MCS on the same problem for 10 to the power 4 LHS samples, and the results are also compared with the PC model, normal PC model, where we need to calculate the coefficients at each time step. And we have specified two different degrees of polynomial. One is 2, another is 3. So if we use 2 degrees of polynomial, then total number of terms in the PC model is 10. If we use 3, then total number of terms will be 20. So this is how we have calculated the computational accuracy, and this is one relative error for the samples and each sample, and then we calculate the mean relative error for all the samples by using this expression. Basically, we take the average of all the samples and calculate the mean relative error. So now I am just showing the results of multiple impacts oscillator, because for single impacts oscillator it is easier to predict the response than the multiple impacts oscillator. So if we just see that if we use the PC model or POD PC model, we are following the same line for the relative error, the mean relative error. So by increasing the number of samples, it is obvious that if we increase the number of samples, the relative error is also decreasing with the number of samples. Then it has found its path, and it is like almost convergent around 50 or 60. So this is for the contact force. The first one is for the contact force, and this one is for the projectile displacement, and this one is the projectile velocity. Sometimes it is PODPC is predicting better result than PC model, but it is not very high. I mean, the difference between these two is very low. So we have predicted the results for most of the response quantities using very low samples, which is n equals to 50. You can imagine we are using here 50 samples, whereas in the MCS we are using 10 to the power 4 samples, and it is very efficient in that way. And we have achieved the highest accuracy for the projectile displacement. You can get directly from the magnitude of the error that it is very low for projectile displacement. If we see what is the predicted statistical moment over the time, so this is for time dependent mean for the contact force, first one, and second one is the projectile displacement, and third one is the projectile velocity. So you can see that all are predicting quite well. A little bit of distortion towards the end is there, but except that every response quantity is predicting quite well. But remember that it is very low velocity impact, and it is very low time step problem. Okay, I mean high frequency problem. And here we have predicted standard deviation also for three response quantities, that is contact force, projectile displacement, and projectile velocities. So again, it is following very, I mean, I would say it is following the MCS result quite well at the initial stage. There is some distortion towards the end, but error is not very high for all the problems, I would say. So we can say that POD, PC, and PC both are following almost the same line. We can see for all the cases, and it is able to predict the results as the MCS using very low number of samples. Uh, what we have done here is basically we have compared some of the samples, randomly selected samples. So these samples we have selected randomly, and we tried to predict at those samples, so how it look like. So we have seen that it is almost following the same pattern as the MCS, but some distortion, as I told you, some distortion towards the end is there because of contact force. Because see, for example, this is a very non-smooth problem. You can see there is a very zero values in between some ranges. So it is very non-smooth and non-linear problem. So and our expression is not non-smooth. It is basically smooth, and it is a continuous function. So predicting non-smooth and non-continuous function using a continuous function is always difficult, and that's why there are some distortion towards the end. But here there is no problem because it is not very difficult to predict for the projectile displacement and projectile velocity. And if we see the accuracy metrics are showing very well. The main thing is that between the PC and PODPC model, you can see that the number of total coefficients calculated as compared to PC for the PODPC model, it is just 1% for all the cases. So it is just 1% of total PC coefficients in case of PODPC model. This is very efficient. So this work has already been published in this journal, so you can look into it for detail. And now I'm showing one of the realistic problem, which is called crash box problem under impact loading. So you know that this is a car, and car has the crash boxes installed in front of it, and this capture the kinetic energy, and it is just trying to mitigate it when it propagate the kinetic energy when there is an impact or there is an accident in front of it. So it tries to mitigate the kinetic energy through crash boxes. So these are the parameter which can be uncertain for this problem, basically, for these crash boxes. And this crash problem is basically a dynamic problem, but under impact loading, and the variation, as I told you, can occur in any of these input parameters. So what we have done, we have modeled this crash box. I mean, we have taken one quarter part of the crash box because it's usually the normal procedure that if we have the symmetric geometry, we can use quarter part of the crash box. So we have taken the quarter part of the crash box and we have modeled in using LS-DYNA software, and it is modeled using the elastoplastic material behavior. So this material behavior we have used. So for this crash box, one end is fixed, from another end it is projecting with some projectile mass and with some initial velocity, basically. So if we just want to see how the problem is formulated as different boundary conditions, so we have here three different crash boxes, the same geometry and same material property. So the first one is fixed at bottom and free at top. For the second one, both ends are free, but there is a mass with some magnitude which is 250 kg was attached to it, and the first end was free. And in the third case, we have added the mass here by freeing the end, but this mass in uncertain. So, and for all the crash boxes, these three parameters are always uncertain. Basically, we consider uncertain, and all these parameters were uncertain, considered uncertain for which are following basically uniform distributions. So this impactor mass, crash box thickness, and stress multiplying factor, which is basically a factor which I've used in the material property, that is elastoplastic behavior, so that it involves some material property also in the uncertain parameters. So uncertainty quantification for this problem was performed on these quantities, that is impact or displacement, velocity, contact force, maximum contact force, and total dissipated energy. Here one more thing we have performed, which is called global sensitivity analysis. So I'm not giving the detail of global sensitivity analysis in this lecture, but you can follow the paper that we have published. How to do global sensitivity analysis for time dependent problem and time independent problem, both we have done basically. So here we can see that it will show some videos. I don't know, the video is somewhere not working. Okay, video is not working somewhere, I don't know. But okay, I was trying to show the failure modes if I want to do the simulations on this crash box. So it will just fold it up with time and it will just move a little bit towards downward for the for the second crash box, but for the first crash box it will stand still because after the folding also, because the end is fixed, it cannot move. So we have specified for this problem, we have specified as this is a finite element problem, we cannot afford too much computational cost also. So we have specified two maximum order of polynomial for PC model 5 and 10, and we have specified the number of maximum model evolution as 200 because we cannot afford many model evolutions. And we have started with, I guess, 10 or 20 samples, and then we increase the number of samples by 5 in each iterations, and to check if we are achieving the desired accuracy or not. So desired accuracy we have fixed at 1 into 10 to the power minus 2 and minus 3. And I mean, we have checked when we can achieve 10 to the power minus 2 and when we can achieve 10 to the power minus 3. Here one more thing is that we have not used the PC model. Here we have used SBB PC model instead of PC model. And what is SBB PC model? It is a Bayesian informed PC model, which is modeled using Bayesian inference. And we have basically inferred the PC model parameter, which is the PC coefficient, using the Bayesian model. And the detail of the SBB PC model can be found here in this paper. So this paper has already been published. You can access this and you can get the detail of SBB PC model. So now, as a reference, also, I mean, we have calculated for some samples because we cannot afford so many samples. So we have calculated for some samples, let's say 1000 samples, to check whether our model is correct or not. And we have taken so much time to calculate the reference results. You can see it is like 18 hours, 13 hours, like that. So this is the evaluation of the leave one out error. So this is called Lou error. Lou error means leave one out error. So this is one of the ways we can check if our model is correct even without the reference result. Okay. So if we see that for crash box 1, the leave one out error is varying. It started from here and it is varying and it is going, it is basically steady state, and then it is not decreasing anymore. So it is not even touched the 10 to the power minus 2 line. And for the second one, it is very close to the 10 to the power minus 2. For third one, it is crossed the 2 to the power minus 2, but it is never crossed the 10 to the power minus 3. Now you can see that how many number of PC coefficients. So here one more thing I just want to emphasize, that this SVB PC model just try to calculate not only the PC coefficients, but it tries to minimize the number of coefficients. Okay, by calculating the important coefficients. So it includes the important coefficients, but it doesn't include all the PC coefficients. So we calculate the number of important coefficients for each cases. So here is the number of important coefficients which are used in the SBPC model. So you can see that how many number of coefficients were required actually. So it is starting when the n is very low, it is starting with low, and then it is keep on increasing. Obviously for 10 order of polynomial, it will take much higher terms, but it is obvious that we are getting lower error for 10 with degree of polynomial 10. So here we have predicted the statistical moments, which are basically mean for, and this is only for the contact force I'm showing right now, because other quantities are very easy to predict, but only difficult thing is the contact force. So here it is the mean for the first crash box, and this is the mean for the second crash box, and this is the mean for the third crash box. And this one are the standard deviation. Obviously mean is predicted quite well as compared to the standard deviations. So standard deviation, there is some distortion towards the end of the times as compared to the MCS results. So if we just check the predicted accuracy for 3 response quantities, which are time dependent response quantities, so you can see it took almost 200 samples to achieve the higher accuracy for the contact force. But if you check the impactor displacement and impactor velocity, it took very less number of samples. It took very like 30, 20, something like that, 50, 60 to achieve very low accuracy, high accuracy for all the crash boxes. And this is what we have done in global sensitivity analysis for the contact force. So we had 4 parameters. For the first two, we have 3 parameters. For the last one, we have 4 parameters. So you can see that how the so we have two index basically. One is called partial sensitivity index. So basically in partial sensitivity index we try to calculate how each input parameter independently influencing the response quantity, which is contact force here. And another quantity is here, that is called sensitivity index ratio. We have proposed that sensitivity index ratio, and it is the ratio between the partial sensitivity index and the total sensitivity index. And total sensitivity index also includes the term, for example, when there is a term multiplied with first term multiplied with the second or third term. So we can see that this green line and blue line is always influencing higher than this red line. So this H, which is the thickness of the plate, and this material property is mostly influencing for all the cases. For all the cases, this material property and this thickness. So these are the very two important design parameter when we want to design this crash box under this uncertain condition. So this is very important to follow, and all the results have already been published in this journal, so you can follow the journal paper if you want to know more about this paper and about the work in detail. So the last topic I'm just going to introduce is the online reduced order surrogate model. I think I am just close to 1 hour, but I will try to finish as quickly as possible. So here what we have done, we have used some enhanced incremental SVT approach to make it online. Basically what happened, in dynamic problems, the data comes in online manner. It is not always true that we get all the data up to number of times in one go. So if the data comes in online manner, what we should do? So we should evolve the POD matrix and the singular values. So that is how it is being used. So it is basically evolving over when we are adding more and more data. So what we do here, update the three matrices, all three matrices, U, sigma, and W, that is left singular matrix, right singular matrix, and this singular value matrix. We update all these matrices when we have a new data to this matrix basically. So this C here represent the new data basically. So we have already Y, and this C is the new data. So basically we want to project it onto the orthogonal complement of this. So basically this, as I told you previously, these are orthogonal modes. So then we try to use the residual magnitude and normalized directions. These are the residual magnitude and normalized direction to compute the new POD modes and new singular values. So how to calculate that? So you can see that we have this Y represent this old data, and this represent the new data. So it is added into the matrix. So what we should do basically, we have this already SVD of this old data, and we have to add this one, and then we have to do the SVD of new data. So if we do that, this equation can be represented using this equation. Obviously there are some steps we are not following here, all the steps. And here the important key point is that we have to do this SVD of Q, which is not a full matrix even, which is a sparse matrix. You can see some zero is there, and computing this SVD of this matrix is very straightforward and very quick, and as compared to the full Y matrix. So what we do the SVD of this Q matrix, and then we update the matrix. So we update the POD modes and the new singular values. So this is the updated U, and this is updated sigma, and this is updated right singular matrix. So this is how we do in online manner. So once the new data is added, we update the POD matrix or POD vectors. Okay. So once we have it, we can represent the response in a similar way using this expression. And here, as you see, this POD mode is basically depending on this input parameter, and this is POD time-dependent POD mode. And again, this I'm just repeating again that these are the random variables, and not only random variables, these are the realizations of the random variable, which is inscribed in a matrix. And now we want to calculate this k, and that we can calculate by projecting this on this u, the PID modes. And once we have it, now we are using here a Kriging model, which is called Gaussian process model. And we are representing these POD modes because those are dependent on the random variable. So we are representing these POD modes using this expression, and this is a Gaussian process expression. So I'm not explaining in detail what are these expressions, but you can go through from some reference. So it has two parts. One is regression part, one is Gaussian process part, and we model this part, and we need to find out the coefficient. This is one parameter we need to find out. Another thing is that polynomial basis we can find out using the way that we have been using, but here we need to follow a different way, because here we use basically normalized value, and we polynomials are basically the following some of the type of the polynomial that we use for specific Kriging model. There are different Kriging model, for example, ordinary Kriging model, universal Kriging model. So depending on that, we use the polynomial basis functions. And we model the Gaussian process using zero mean, and the covariance will have covariance between the Gaussian processes will have some expression like this, and this is the Gaussian process covariance standard deviation, and this is the correlation autocorrelation functions. So here we have used Gaussian autocorrelations, but there are some other correlation functions also. For example, linear and square exponential. So those functions are there, and you can model it like that. So here we have two parameters which we need to find out, which is called sigma and again theta. This theta we need to optimize basically, but we need to initialize this theta, but we need to optimize this theta for a particular problem, for particular data set. And all these things we need to do for all number of POD modes. And once we have all these things together, and we can write the stochastic response quantity using this expression. But here again, this one is time dependent mode, so we don't need to touch it here. And this one we predict using the Kriging model. Now here it is important to mention that we are using some expectation operator, because this Kriging model is a kind of stochastic model, but it is providing also what is the model uncertainty. So the model uncertainty can be evaluated, and basically we are taking the mean of the model uncertainty, prediction of the model uncertainty. So that's why we are using the expectation, and we can get the variance from the model uncertainty also to predict what kind of variance we are getting from all the data that we are using. Now this is a generic flow map. So first what we do basically, we generate the random samples, and then we compute the stochastic responses at those random samples, and then we initialize the POD using very small number of time steps. And then what we do, we initiate the POD vectors or POD matrices, and we retain n number of POD modes. And then what we do, we fit the Kriging model loop inside the POD basis. So here input is the zeta, and output is the POD modes. And from there we predict what could be the POD modes for new data point. So this data point we are using in training, this data point we are not using in training, we are predicting at this point. So what could be the POD mode when we have new data point? And this will then lead to the joint online POD Gaussian process model, and from there we predict the response at the new samples. Okay, and this loop will follow basically when the new data is added. So this loop will follow up, and we keep on increasing the time. So this paper has already been recently published in Probabilistic Engineering Mechanics, and if you want to follow more about the model formulation and how to use that, you can go through the paper to get an idea. Now I'm showing just the applications, so I will not take much time. So here we have used a linear ordinary differential equations, and you can see that here we have used only one random variable, which is called b, and this is uniformly distributed between 0 and 1. So what we have done is we have prepared a reference solution using MCS using 30,000 samples, and then we have constructed the online periodic rigging model using LHS. And this relative normalized root mean square error was used to calculate the accuracy of the prediction. So this is how it looked like when we increase the number of samples. It is obviously increasing the number of we are increasing the number of samples, and then we are increasing the accuracy over the time. And this is the number of POD modes. Here we have compared with the offline POD also. You can see that in offline POD based kriging model, it takes a higher number of POD modes than online POD kriging model. And you can see from the computational point of view also, you can see that in offline it is taking higher time than online one when we are using the same number of samples. So it is also computationally efficient without losing the accuracy. So here we have predicted the mean and the confidence interval. That means 95% confidence interval using the online POD kriging and offline POD kriging model. We can say that both predicting very good results, but the online one is taking much less time and it is taking much less number of POD modes to predict the same similar accuracy, I would say. And here it is the standard deviation that we have predicted using both offline and online POD kriging model for this particular system. On top of that, we have tried to find out what is the evaluation of the PDF. So you can see this is the PDF at 1 second, and this is how it looked like. It is very much converging with the MCS result, and at the later time also it is converging quite well with the MCS results. And the second problem we have considered is a nonlinear system, nonlinear Duffing oscillator. And all these red color parameters were considered uncertain for this problem. And these are the parameters. And here we have mixed kind of distribution. Some parameters are uniformly distributed, some parameters are Gaussian distribution. So these are like that. And these are the parameters of the distribution. And we have again calculated the reference solutions using 30,000 samples, and this is how it looked like the error evaluation with the number of samples. Here again we have seen the similar accuracy for offline and online POD kriging model. The only thing is that you can see that offline over the time, when the timing is increasing over the time, it is very steady and it is able to predict very good result using very less number of POD modes, whereas at the same time for offline POD it is taking higher number of POD modes. And the same thing for the computational cost, it is taking less time over the time for the online POD kriging model as compared to the offline one. So these are the predicted mean for the online and offline cases along with the 95% confidence interval. Again, this was we have calculated from directly from the Kriging model uncertainty. So as I told you that it predicts the model uncertainty because it has two parameters, mean and standard deviation of the model parameter. So it can predict the model uncertainty. And then we have predicted the standard deviation also, and we have predicted the confidence interval of the standard deviation also. And we have also predicted the PDF over the time. It is the PDF at 15 second and it is PDF at 30 second, almost at the last time. So you can see all the PDFs are predicting quite well. It is able to capture the PDF over the time also without losing the accuracy. The third problem we have used here is a three-mode problem. It is called Krasnon-Orzech three-mode problem. It is a combination of three parameters, I mean three input parameters, x1, x2, x3. Now all these three parameters are initiated using initial values, and in initial value, it is an initial value problem, and in initial value we have considered one random variable which is called zeta here. And this was following uniform distribution between -1 to 1, and other parameters were remain constant for this problem. And here also we have calculated the reference solution using MCS, and here we have three response quantity x1, x2, x3. And if we see that how it look like for all these three quantities when we are evaluating the time dependent normalized root mean square error, so it will look like this. So you can see that for x1, x2, x3 it is almost following the similar pattern. Over the time it is increasing, but we have got the accuracy quite well for both the cases, offline and online. It is following the same line basically, but the main problem is that offline here is taking much higher number of POD modes than the online case in most of the cases. Sometimes it is higher, but over the time it is decreasing for all the three cases. And the main is that computational cost over the time is basically very low for online periodic rigging model as compared to the offline one. And we have also predicted the mean for all the three cases using the offline and online, and all the three cases we have predicted the confidence interval also. And in both cases, it is predicting quite well, even though it is offline or online, it is predicting quite well the results. And for standard deviation also, it is predicting the results quite well. It is very close to the standard deviation what is available through the reference result. We have also predicted the PDF evolution of PDF over the time, and this is the for the first one at 5 seconds, and then at 40 seconds, which is the last time, and this is for the second one, and this is for the third response quantity. The last problem we have solved here, an 8-story building under base excitation. So this is an 8-story building, and the base excitation is given with some acceleration, base acceleration. We have used 10,000 samples for the reference results, and all these parameters are following log normal distribution. So here we have two type of stiffnesses, and both are following log normal distribution, and we have included one standard deviation on this acceleration, and this standard deviation is following log normal distribution. So this is what the normalized relative normalized root mean square error when we are evaluating over the time. And you can see that online periodic rigging is taking very less number of POD modes with only 100 samples, and it is taking very less time for this case also, for the CPU time, if you consider the CPU time. So this is what we have predicted from the statistical moments, and this is at the top floor. I mean, we are predicting the displacement at the top floor. So this is the top floor displacement we have predicted directly using the online periodic rigging model and offline periodic rigging model. Both are predicting results very good, and we have calculated the standard deviation also. That is also quite well converging with the MCS result, we can say. So this is the predicted PDF at different times. It is at 5 seconds. It is at the end of time, which is 20 seconds. So both are converging well with the MCS results. So with this, I'm just concluding the presentation with some few remarks that we have drawn. So the first thing is that we have used the PODPC model, which decouples the time domain and the randomness quite well, and it was able to predict the non-smooth and nonlinear behavior of the oscillators that we have used as an example quite well. And in adaptive PODPC model, because the model that we have used for the crash box, it was adaptive POD SBBPC model, and it was adaptive according to the response quantity, and it performed quite well for the realistic engineering dynamical systems, we can say. And then we have introduced online surrogate model for uncertainty quantification, and that is possible due to the online behavior to have the data in online manner, and then we can predict as the data comes. And we have performed online uncertainty quantification without losing the accuracy and with higher efficiency. So it is computationally cheap as compared to the offline or other UQ models. And also we have captured the PDF evaluations quite well using the reduced or surrogate model, whether it is offline or online. So these are some of the points that you can take with you from this presentation. But again, you need to go back and check what kind of model it is and what kind of model we should use for what kind of problem it is, and then you can use it. It is not that you can use this model for any problem. There are some limitations of it. And this is they are the members actually from our lab, and they are contributing to the research quite well from last 4 years, almost 4 years I have joined IIT Hyderabad. So they are continuously working on different domains. For example, digital twins, reliability analysis, structural health monitoring, data-driven metamaterial design, and then we have people who are working on stochastic, peridynamic, stochastic phase field models. All this they are working. So I'm thankful to them for the work they are performing here. And this is a global outline of our lab. So these are the topics we cover usually in our lab. If anyone want to do research in any of these areas, they can do the research. Obviously, this is not limited, but yeah, we are trying to basically use the data fusion with machine learning, and then we are trying to use the physics-based model to quantify uncertainty, predict response, then structural health monitoring, trying to predict the damages, and we are trying to model the metamaterial using data, and also we are trying to do reliability-based design optimizations and reliability analysis of different structures. With this, I'm thanking you all for listening to the presentation. So, okay, I'm just closing it from my end. So I want to hear back from your side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Biswarup, for a comprehensive presentation on the uncertainty quantification. Chaitanya, it's over to you.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful session on uncertainty quantification of dynamic systems. The session was very helpful in knowing how real-world structural problems dealt under dynamic loading modeled computationally. The discussion on how input parameters computational models considered, how QoI, quantity of interest, computed from that, sources of uncertainty like allegatory, epistemic, and some UQ approaches like Monte Carlo simulation, surrogate modeling approach, and their comparison, helpful in understanding their practical implications. The explanation of polynomial chaos expansion, intrusive and non-intrusive methods for computing PCE computations, PODs, proper orthogonal decomposition, online and offline, and how PODs used for mode prediction, and research work on some three-mode problems and eight-story building provided valuable knowledge. Once again, thank you, sir, for your valuable lecture. Now we will take the questions from the participants. Sir,
Yeah.
Praveen, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Chaitanya. So we have a couple of questions from our participants, Dr. Biswarup. So I'll read one by one. There was a point where you have mentioned what exactly is substituting a physical system with a mathematical function?
Okay.
What do you mean by that?
Okay. Thank you for this question. So basically, if you go back to the presentation again, if I go back to the presentation again, I will want to emphasize on the presentation. For example, this is the physical system, the governing differential equation of the. I hope you were able to see my screen and you were able to see the slide 22.
Right.
So this is the governing differential equation for the system, and if we want to get the response, we have to solve this governing differential equation for this problem. And for this crash box problem, if we want to get the response, we have to solve this problem in finite element, right? So we don't want to use this basically. So what we want to use, instead of using that model to get the response, we want to substitute this expression in that response quantity, and we then can use this expression instead of using the finite element model here, and then it is very cheap to calculate for any new sample that is coming into the picture. But again, for that you need to obviously calculate the response at initial some number of samples that you have to spare. I mean, you cannot say that I can start from zero. It is not possible. You need to have some data points available to learn how the parameter will behave.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is a little lengthy.
Okay.
For simplification of computational models, what uncertainties have more substantial impact on the output? And what uncertainties can be ignored without compromising the accuracy?
Yeah, correct. Thank you for this question. Actually, I have not comprehensively covered that part in this presentation, and but some part I have covered. So I will go back to that slide where I have covered that part actually. So on this slide, basically, I have done global sensitivity analysis for contact force. Here you can see that two parameters are emphasizing, or two parameters are affecting more on this response quantity, which is contact force. So if my design parameter is all these four parameters, I would consider, for example, these two parameters. So I would emphasize on these two parameters while designing the crash box. So I will tell the designer that when you are manufacturing this crash box, you must emphasize on these two parameters, that thickness of the crash box and this material property of the crash box, and you try to minimize the error when you are manufacturing this. But I would not mind when there is some uncertainty in the impactor mass, because it is seen that it is affecting very less on the contact force. But I would emphasize here basically. So this is basically, I will try to emphasize more when I want to design these two parameters. But again, the background on what to do and how to do this global sensitivity analysis, those things I have not included in this presentations. Again, for those things you have to follow some of my papers that we have already published.
And also, you have mentioned that the accuracy efficiency trade-off. So,
Yes.
how much accuracy can we safely sacrifice in this specific context?
Okay, for example, as I was mentioning here, for example, here you can see that we were using some error metric here, which is called leave one out error. Okay, so it was seen in the past, okay, from several problems. If we achieve an accuracy of 10 to the power minus 2 or 10 to the power minus 3 for a particular problem, we can say that we can trade off with the number of points, or number of points that we want to use to calculate the model or fit the model. Okay, so that is what we have been using actually, that accuracy level of 10 to the power minus 2 or 10 to the power minus 3 for the leave one out error. Again, uh, again, it depends on what accuracy metrics you want to use. Okay, but everyone is not forced to use the leave one out error. You can use some other metric, and then you have to justify that what kind of what kind of error you want to take into account. And again, it is up to the designer also, that what kind of accuracy they want to expect. Okay, so that is also one of the cases.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is on the simulation part.
Yeah.
How do we balance the computational cost when using the methods like Monte Carlo simulation, especially for uncertainty quantification in the large dynamic systems?
Yeah, I'm not getting fully the questions, but see, the Monte Carlo simulation is a brute force model. Okay, and just we don't want to use the Monte Carlo simulation always. Okay, that is the basic idea. And Monte Carlo simulation is basically going to give you the result, which is like we have been using as a reference result. But if you have seen that in case of the practical problem, that crash box problem, we have used only 1000 Monte Carlo simulations, I mean 1000 model evaluations, which is not very high if we just say the method of Monte Carlo simulations. So Monte Carlo simulation will give you the idea when you have some equations or some model where you can afford at least very high number of samples, then you can get a very good statistics. But again, as I mentioned in my presentation, that if you don't increase the number of samples, then your model uncertainty will be higher if you are using Monte Carlo simulations, and that may underestimate your result.
So the follow-up question is, since we are talking about this Monte Carlo simulation, how is it different from this surrogate modeling?
Okay.
There are two different approaches altogether.
Yeah, they are very much different actually, because in Monte Carlo simulation, so what we do is basically we directly use the physical system or the computational model, physical system computational model, and we use all the samples, for example 10 to the power 5 samples or 10 to the power 6 samples, million samples, and then we evaluate each samples and get the response. It is like a brute force approach. But in surrogate model we don't do that. In surrogate model we say we use the high fidelity model, that is the computational model, and use the high fidelity model to get the response at very low number of samples, which is not 10 to the power 4 or 10 to the power 5, which may be 100, 200, or 500, or maybe 1000, which is also lower than 1 million samples. So we don't need to use that. So we are using the low number of samples, then we are fitting the surrogate model using the low number of samples available, and then we are trying to fit the model using, and we are trying to increase the accuracy. Obviously you add more samples, you get higher accuracy, it is obvious, and that is the case for all the error metric I have seen, I have shown here.
Thank you. We will move to the next question. It says, why is the crash box considered a dynamic problem and not a static problem?
Okay. Yeah, that is like, I mean, it depends on your designer. Okay, what quantity you want to predict. Okay, so here for this problem, we have calculated actually uncertainty quantification for dynamic quantities, also for non-dynamic quantities. Okay, but I have not shown all the results here in the presentation because it's not possible, because it's not feasible. Okay, for that I suggest you to go through the paper that I have mentioned. You will get all the response quantities and all the non-dynamic response quantities also, where we have considered uncertainty quantification and predicted uncertainty in the response quantity, which are not dependent on time. Okay, so it depends on designer what problem you want to formulate and how much way. Okay, but again we have formulated this problem as impact dynamics problem because it is an impact dynamics problem. Okay, it is not only the dynamic problem, it has the non-smooth behavior and it has non-linear behavior, both is there. Okay, and it is like a low velocity impact, so we did not use the high velocity impact here. It is basically low velocity impact here. So we have used very low velocity impact and controlled impact basically, because we have used only the frontal impact here. Only the front load is coming there. But there may be some other cases. For example, it can be angular forces, it can be coming with some oblique angle, for example. Those was not considered for this purpose here. So it is like impact dynamics problem. And to demonstrate that, first we have used the impact oscillator, impact dynamic oscillator. You can see that it is in very low, very high frequency, very low time step problem, and then we have used that. Okay.
The next question says, for the non-intrusive OLS approach, did you use any regularization like lasso to prevent overfitting, or just standard least square given the sample size?
Okay. This is very good question actually, in line with our research methodology and what we have developing. So in the first approach, when we were describing the PODPC for the impact oscillator, there we did not use any lasso or regularized parameterization to prevent overfitting, but we have used indeed the general OLS approach. Then when we were using the practical problem, so we thought of using a regularization approach. There we have used the sparse variational Bayesian inference based PC model, which is a regularized approach, and where we are selecting the number of PC coefficient like lasso or least angle regression does. So we are doing the same thing, but here we are using Bayesian approach.
Bayesian approach, okay. The next question says, does the number of required POD modes increase significantly when modeling multiple impact events compared to a single impact case? And
Yeah.
how does this affect accuracy and computational cost?
Yeah, so it's obvious that here again I have not presented the results of single impact oscillator because I believe that it is much simpler than multiple impact oscillator. But again, you can go through the paper that we have published. There, both the results are there for single and multiple impact oscillator. But again, it is obvious that when we have system dynamics, for example, as compared to linear to non-linear, then non-smooth, it will increase. The number of POD modes will increase. It is obvious. And obviously, for single impact oscillator, we got higher accuracy than the multiple impact oscillator. because that is very difficult problem than multiple impacts oscillator. Even when we were working on this problem, we encountered that even the oscillator problem is much difficult than the problem we were handling realistically. For example, crash box problem. So crash box problem, even handling crash box problem is much easier than the oscillator, which is a mathematical problem. Still handling that problem is much difficult than the crash box problem.
In practical, when it would be recommended for an intrusive PCE over non-intrusive approaches?
Okay, actually, the thing is that when PC was invented, no, so that time it was not known as PC, but it was known as some other approach. For example, it was known as the spectral decomposition approach, and basically that time it was only intrusive. There was no non-intrusive approaches. Okay, and people used to use the spectral finite element approach. So basically inside the finite element, so you know that inside when we are using some finite element approach, obviously we are formulating that problem using the governing differential equations. For example, we have Euler-Bernoulli beam, we want to solve the beam, we have the governing differential equations of the Euler-Bernoulli beam, and then we want to solve the beam, we want to solve the differential equation, we form the weak form of the finite element, and then we solve the integration to get the response or solution. Okay, and then it is very useful when we have low number of parameters, okay, in the system, or low number of input parameters. Then you don't need to worry about that number of PC terms, and then you can calculate it easily. Okay, but when it is flourishing, then it is very difficult, it getting very very difficult. So then it is not advisable to use intrusive but to use non-intrusive. But here I want to mention one more thing, that if anyone wants to use intrusive approach, and if anyone uses intrusive approach, they will get higher accuracy, obviously, because that is being used in the inside the governing differential equations. For example, nowadays, many of you are hearing about the approach, for example, physics informed machine learning, for example, right? And physics informed machine learning is actually intrusive approach, it is not non-intrusive approach. It is basically we are using the physics inside the loss function, and in the loss function when we are using physics, so it is not no longer the non-intrusive approach. So it is a mix of non-intrusive and intrusive approach, but we cannot say it is a non-intrusive approach.
Thank you. The next question is, how does the surrogate model mentioned help gets the results faster without losing the accuracy?
Okay. So once, for example, for any problem, once we fit the model, no, I mean, we can assure the accuracy with the error metric that we have used. Okay. And once we fit the model, as I was telling you, that once we fit the model, we have the mathematical form, right? And you don't have to, for example, you have a new sample point and you want to calculate what is the response at that sample point.
Right.
And then what you have to do, if you want to calculate the response at that new sample point, you have to run again the finite element, and that will take hours of time. But once you are fitted with some mathematical form, let's assume one simple mathematical form, ax square plus bx plus c, and once you know what is the value of abc, you give it to x, give the system, give the expression x, you will immediately get y. You don't need to solve the finite element, right? You immediately get y. So this is the beauty of surrogate model.
What is the physical meaning of the Gaussian autocorrection and how is it affecting the function?
Gaussian autocorrection, I don't know if I have mentioned anywhere. I have not mentioned Gaussian autocorrection. I have even mentioned Gaussian autocorrelation.
Okay,
Uh,
correlate.
yeah.
Maybe.
So I have used the Gaussian autocorrelation. This is a function basically. So this is a function which is used to fit the Gaussian process. Now, obviously, we have seen different autocorrelation function for GP, for Gaussian process model. And as I mentioned in the presentation also, that we can have linear autocorrelation functions, we can have different kernels, for example, we can have squared exponential autocorrelation function, we can have Mattern kernel, for example. So we can use different correlation functions, and then you have different parameters to estimate according to the correlation functions, autocorrelation functions. And it is obvious that for different problems, you may need different autocorrelation functions. Okay. But Gaussian is the widely used, so we have used that. But it's not limited to only Gaussian. You can use any other autocorrelation function. Okay,
We'll
depending on
take,
problems.
thank you. We'll take last two questions and then we'll conclude the event. So why is uncertainty unavoidable, even when the advanced numerical models are used?
Yes. So the thing is that you assume very simple problem. Okay, you assume very simple problem. I am not going into any complex dynamic, all these things. You assume very simple problem. For example, you want to test cube in the lab, concrete cube, and you want to get the compressive strength. Okay, you test 10 cubes only. Okay, you won't get the same result always. It's obvious. Okay, although we say that concrete is homogeneous, concrete is not homogeneous, it is heterogeneous, and it depends on your workmanship, your condition, and your surface also, what kind of surface you are using for compaction and all these things, what exactly you are using, all these things matters. So all these things come into the effect of uncertainty. So you will never be able to avoid uncertainty. Even I would emphasize it here that even in is codes also, most of you have seen that there is a parameter called standard deviation where you want to do mixed design, and that standard deviation is coming due to uncertainty. And
Uncertainty.
uncertainty, and you know that we use some safety factor also when we design any structure, for example, and those
Cool.
safety factors are basically coming due to uncertainty only. Okay, these safety factors are calculated using reliability analysis. We have reliability analysis approaches, and we calculate the safety factor using reliability analysis. There are books you can refer to understand how these safety factors are calculated.
The next question is, in practical design, you talked about this aleatory uncertainty, right? So in practical design, how much aleatory uncertainty do we intentionally accept and why?
Okay, so we usually say that we usually expect to get around 10 to 15% uncertainty or with respect to the parameter mean values. Okay, usually we don't allow more than 10%. Okay, but for important parameters it is not more than 2% or 5%. For example, when I was showing the problem of crash box, we have seen that the thickness is very important there. So we should not allow there more than 5% uncertainty for that problem. Okay, so it depends on what parameter you want to design for that particular problem. Okay, so not more than 10% in my opinion in any case.
And the last question is, since we are talking about the uncertainty input parameter as well as about the model, so I'll link all these three in one question. How is uncertainty in input parameters are different from uncertainty in the model itself?
Okay, so I have actually differentiated this in early of my slides when I was telling about aleatory and epistemic uncertainty. So when we are talking about this model uncertainty, that means that is coming from the epistemic uncertainty. Okay. So we can even in my course here I am teaching machine learning course in IIT Hyderabad. So when I teach this course, I show with example that how we are reducing this model uncertainty. So you increase
Okay.
the number of data points, you decrease the model uncertainty. But the aleatory uncertainty, whatever is there, that is present, even with increasing the uncertainty, even with increasing the number of data points. So you cannot decrease the aleatory uncertainty if that is present in the system, but you can decrease the model uncertainty. So these are two different things, but both will contribute to the output uncertainty.
Output, yes, yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Biswarup, for clarifying all the doubts and the questions of our participants. Chaitanya, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Praveen, once again for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. I believe the queries from all participants have been addressed. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Chandramouli Subramaniam to deliver the vote of thanks.
Greetings to all. I am Chandramouli Subramaniam, master student at the Earthquake Engineering Research Center. It's my honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the entire executive committee of IIT Hyderabad student chapter. First and foremost, I extend our deepest gratitude to our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Biswarup Bhattacharyya, for his insightful presentation and enlightening session on uncertainty quantification of the dynamical systems. Today, webinars has highlighted that in dynamical systems, uncertainties affect about how systems evolve over the time and leads to variabilities in system response. We learned about the sources of uncertainties as aleatories and epistemic. And uncertainty quantification is about identifying the uncertainties in computational models like analytic equations and finite element models, etc. Quantifying the impact on quantity of interest that is affected by the uncertainty. Approaching in uncertainty quantification include Monte Carlo simulation, a surrogate model approach, which is accurate and efficient and reduced to order surrogate can that modeling approach can simplify the complex system by reducing the dimensions uh, and the polynomial chaos expansion, which is used as a effectively model uncertainty in complex systems by representing the random responses. It is widely applied in um, stochastic crash problems to predict the variations and to improve the accuracy for the nonlinear behavior. A crashing model is often used as surrogate. For loss case data, POD modes are evaluated in offline states using the high fidelity simulations. And in the online stage, the reduced model enables fast predictions of responses with low computational cost. Moving on that, I would also like to express our heartfelt gratitude to our faculty advisor, Dr. Praveen Kumar Venkatrao, for his continuous guidance and valuable suggestions throughout the planning and execution of this event. A special mention goes to the IT team for ensuring seamless technical support and to the design team for their creative inputs, logistical assistance. I thank our programming coordinator, Dr. Sunita Paliseri, for her continuous encouragement. I also want to express my appreciation to all participants for their active involvement and thoughtful questions, which enhanced the discussions and made this webinar a collaborative learning experience. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of the entire team, whose collective effort has made this event a success. We are extremely grateful and look forward to your continuous support in our future initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all the team of ISTRT student chapter there in IIT Hyderabad, and thank you, Dr. Praveen, for inviting me for this nice discussion. So yeah, thank you all. Have a nice day to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.